Hello, it's time to learn what a direct object is in Spanish. So by definition, a direct object is a noun, whether a person or a thing, that someone or something acts upon. The reason why it's called direct object is because the action is performed directly upon it and nothing else. God, that was boring. Let's just see some examples. So in English we can say, Jake wants the painting, Marta knows Marco, Alisa reads the book. There is two simple rules that will easily help us identify direct object. Number one is direct object can be a person or a thing, and number two is direct object answers the questions what or whom. Now let's look at our examples one by one. Jake wants the painting. Jake wants what? The painting, right? Jake is the subject who performs an action of wanting something. But what does he want? That's right, the painting. The painting is a direct object of this sentence because that's what Jake wants. In the second example, we have Marta, who knows someone or something. Marta is a subject who performs an action of knowing someone. So the question we ask here is, whom does she know? She knows Marco, which makes Marco a direct object of the sentence. As a side note, there's a chance that you don't know the difference between who and whom, especially if English is not your native language, like it's the case with me, for example. So let's clarify it, shall we? When we use who, it can only be applied to the subject who performs an action, while whom can only be an object, or someone who receives an action. That's why we can't use the question who to identify a direct object of the sentence. You have to ask whom with the M. So let's go back to our example of Marta knows Marco. In this sentence, when we ask who, it can only be Marta, and when we ask whom Marta knows, it can only be Marco. I hope it's clear. Having said that, let's take a look at our last example, which is Alisa reads the book. Alisa is a subject who performs an action of reading something. And that something is what? A book. Perfect. Now that we know what direct object is, let's talk about the concept of direct object pronouns. Let's look at one example. She sees Marco. She has known Marco for 4 years. She thinks about Marco in the shower. Alright, let me scratch the last one. We can clearly see that these two sentences are a part of the same text or a story. But don't you think that repeating the name Marco, who happens to be a direct object of this sentence, is a little redundant or simply unnecessary? That's what we have direct object pronouns for. They are used to replace direct object in a sentence so that you wouldn't sound like a moron. Now let's go back to the sentence and see how we can modify it. Boom. Better, isn't it? By using the pronoun him in this case, we can avoid being repetitive and still get the point across with no problem. As you probably know, him and her are not the only pronouns that exist in our languages. Now let's learn them all and finally move to the Spanish part of the video. What we have for English direct object pronouns is me, you, him, her, it, us, them and you. Now let's do the same but in Spanish. What we have is me, te, lo, la, nos, los, las. A couple of things to notice here, specifically about the pronouns of the third person singular and plural groups. Here we'll cover two groups, people and things. Let's begin with people. First things first, I hope you know that the third person singular form is represented by pronouns él, ella and usted, which is he, she, and formal you, that is used to respectfully refer to someone. But since Spanish is a gendered language, that means that this someone can be either man or a woman, for example your college professor. So when you're gonna talk about your friend Jack, you will say, for example, oh Jack, sí, lo conozco, which means, oh yeah, I know him. But when you're talking directly to your college professor Jack, the sentence lo conozco will mean I know you. Same goes for ladies. We'll discuss this in a bigger detail soon. The second group of the third person singular pronouns is things. Well, just one thing to be precise. In English we say it when we refer to a thing, like for example, I don't like it. But in Spanish all things are either masculine or feminine, which means we have to use lo for masculine singular thing and la for feminine singular thing. Now let's discuss the third person plural. Luckily, if you understand how lo and la work, it will be a cakewalk for you. Because los and las work just like lo and la, meaning that not only they are used to replace people like ellos, ellas and ustedes, but also for masculine and feminine things that are plural. Let's come back to the original table and just take a deep breath. The reason why I put so much attention to the third person direct object pronouns is because no one is discussing it in detail, and this is the most confusing part of this whole topic. Everyone is only talking about he, she, it, and no one says a word about how to handle formal you, which is usted. This is the video I wish I had when I was a beginner in Spanish, so here it fucking is. Now let's finally jump to examples. We're going to cover every single direct object pronoun that you see on the screen. Let's go. We begin with Anna me escucha, which means Anna listens to me. Here there's nothing really to replace, since we can't find examples where direct object will be I. We always just use me in English or me in Spanish. Same goes for te or you in formal. For example, te quiero means I love you. You don't really have to think about me or te pronouns because they can refer only to me and you. Now the fun part begins. Llamaron a mi papá. Lo llamaron, which means they called my dad, they called him. Lo in this case replaces a mi papá because el papá is a masculine word in Spanish. You can do the same thing for your girlfriend Victoria. Simply replace lo for la. Llamaron a Victoria. La llamaron. Good for now? Now let's test usted, which I remind you belongs to the same group of the third person singular pronouns. Let's say you talk to your male professor and say some random stuff like Pienso que usted es muy inteligente. Lo admiro mucho. Which means I think you are very intelligent. I admire you a lot. Don't confuse it with I admire him a lot or I admire it a lot. You're talking directly to your professor, which means him a direct object of this sentence, so lo can only replace usted in this case. Same goes for ladies. Let's say you're talking directly to the president of Slovakia, whose name is Zuzana Kaputova. So you could say Usted es la presidenta de Slovakia. La felicitamos, which means you are the president of Slovakia. We congratulate you. Now let's discuss things, or what we call it in English. For example, el televisor está encendido. ¿Lo puedes apagar? Which means the TV is turned on. Can you turn it off? Since the word TV in Spanish is masculine and singular in this case, that means we have to use lo to replace it correctly. Same goes for feminine things. La señora Ramírez enseña la lección. La señora Ramírez la enseña. Señora Ramírez teaches what? A lesson, which means that the lesson is a direct object of the sentence, and since the lesson is a feminine word, that means we have to replace it with la. The next example will just take a second. El guía ayudó a nuestro grupo. El guía nos ayudó. The guide helped our group. The guide helped us. Hope that makes sense. The last set of examples is all about the third person plural group. Let's finish it. Fernando cuida a los niños. Fernando los cuida. The same can be said when there's a group of ladies, for example. Vicente invitó a las mujeres a la fiesta. Vicente las invitó. Both los niños and las mujeres are translated as them in English. But since they are masculine and feminine plural nouns, they have to be replaced with los and las respectively. Same goes for ustedes, or also called you plural. When we are talking to a group of boys or mixed group of boys and girls, they will be replaced with los. Ustedes son un gran grupo de chicos o individuos mixtos. Los amo. But when we are talking to a group of girls, just girls, we'll have to use las. Ustedes son un gran grupo de chicas. Las amo. As you can see, I'm running out of examples, so we gotta finish this soon. The tricky part with direct object pronouns that replace usted and ustedes is that you're not going to use them very often, but it doesn't mean that these types of situations don't exist. I just want you to be aware of everything. Now we're going to repeat the same thing, but for plural things. For example, Benjamín tiene los regalos. Benjamín los tiene. Los regalos are gifts, which is a masculine plural word and has to be replaced with los. The last example for today is Ella siempre deja las llaves sobre la mesa. Ella siempre las deja sobre la mesa. She always used to leave something on the table. What was it? That's right, las llaves, or the keys. She used to always leave them on the table. Now let's bring all of our examples on the screen and try to see one weird thing about them. You should have noticed by now that the placement of the direct object pronouns in Spanish is a little bit different than how we do it in English. In English we put them after the verb, but in Spanish it happens before the verb. If you are already familiar with the concept of reflexive verbs, you'll have no problem with digesting that. If not, suck it up. I mean, it may be tricky at first, but you'll get used to it in a couple of days. Pinky swear. The only thing to keep in mind is when you have two verbs together, where the first verb is a conjugated verb and the second is infinitive. In this case, just like with reflexive verbs, you have two options. Either to put the direct object pronoun before the first conjugated verb, or just put it after the second verb, which should be in the infinitive form. Both options are absolutely fine. Examples should be down below. Another example of placement is when we do affirmative or negative commands. Here we don't have a choice. For affirmative commands, direct object pronouns can be placed only after the verb. For example, hazlo más rápido, pendejo, which means do it fast, asshole. And for negative commands, you can only place direct object pronouns before the verb. For example, no lo hagas, pendejo, which means don't do it, asshole. If you're not yet familiar with affirmative or negative commands, you can skip this part for now. I understand it's a lot of information for one video. This was a lot of information, I know that. Any questions or video suggestions, please let me know down below. All the links are in the description. I suggest you read them all. Should be very helpful. In the next video, we're gonna cover indirect object pronouns. And that's gonna be a real motherfucker. Love you. Bye.